What's up everybody, it's Kevin here from Happy Beard Games, and today we're doing a comparison video, something that I've never really done on my channel before. We're going to take a look at two different types of video cables for the SEGA Genesis, one you're familiar with, and a new one from Hyperkin that's an HDTV cable. Yes, an HDTV HDMI cable for your SEGA Genesis. Original SEGA Genesis consoles is what I'm talking about. And this is the cable's box right here. It's called the HDTV cable for Genesis. It's by Hyperkin once again, and it's an HDMI cable for HD televisions. You can also use it on monitors or capture devices that use HDMI only. So for today we're using that with our capture device as I'm showing you the recordings on the screen. And basically this works with the SEGA Genesis Model 1, 2, and 3. So it works with all versions of the SEGA Genesis. And we are actually testing this today with the original Model 1 SEGA Genesis. I chose 5 different SEGA Genesis games that are more iconic or more memorable, games that you're familiar with already. So we are comparing these once again with a 480i composite cable from the original SEGA Genesis. So we've got the yellow, red, white cable that you're familiar with versus this new HDMI cable which outputs at 720p resolution, and these are both recorded at 60 frames per second, same recorder, and the same aspect ratio, which is 4:3. So let's jump in with this. Let's do this. You've got the composite cable on the left side of the screen and the HDMI cable on the right side of the screen. And I picked 5 games. These games will start out with the gameplay demos that automatically load when you put in the game. So there will be the same video on each side of the screen for each game. Now you can see the first game is Sonic the Hedgehog 3. You've got this nice opening cutscene. It's a very bright and colorful game. That's why I chose this one first, and it's an iconic game with Sonic the Hedgehog. Now you can see immediately that the HDMI cable is much sharper than the composite cable, which is what we wanted it to be. That's kind of the highlight of it. But the problem with the HDMI cable is the saturation. It's not quite as saturated in color as the composite cable, and also the image is a little bit darker. It's not as bright or vibrant. You do get that nice clear crisp picture of HD on the HDMI cable, but you also miss out on the composite cable's color saturation and brightness levels. The second game I chose was Echo the Dolphin. Now while Sonic the Hedgehog is known for being fast, and the SEGA Genesis is a fast console overall, I did pick Echo the Dolphin because it's a fast game. And you can see that on the graphics, how fast everything moves and how quickly the character responds in the gameplay. Speed is an important thing to look at when you're comparing these cables because you want to make sure that both cables are still displaying at the same frame rate and the same speed. You don't want any lag from these cables. And as far as I can tell, between the composite and the HDMI cable, there's no noticeable lag. There's no distinguishable lag. I didn't notice anything different in terms of speed or any type of rendering or something that might slow down your gameplay experience. So I noticed no input lag at all from these cables. The third game is Mortal Kombat, and I apologize a bit here because I didn't get it synced up perfectly on both sides of the video, but I got it as close as I could. Keep in mind during all these videos that the composite cable has much more vibrant, saturated color and a brighter appearance overall, and the HDMI is a little more washed out, not so saturated in color or vibrance. It has a little bit darker image, but it's much sharper. They're both equally fast and responsive, but the HDMI is much sharper, clearer, cleaner picture quality, although it is darker and less saturated. And as we stick around on this video, I'll show you and let you know ways that you can increase the saturation and brightness, not just on recorded video, but on settings on your TV. So you can do that either with editing software like I'm doing on this video, or you can do it by adjusting some of the settings on your HD television. And the fourth game on this list, Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. Now this one's important for a couple reasons as well, and that is because it has a nice 2D pixel art style, and you can see how crisp the pixels are throughout the game. You can also look at this text that loads up at the start of the game, so you can see how much clearer text is on the HDMI. Another thing that I want to point out about these video comparisons, if you can hear the background music is all coming from the HDMI cable. I didn't use or include the composite cable's audio. So we're only using the audio from the HDMI cable, and the audio as well is something that's just as important as the video in some cases, especially on a game like Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, which is all about music. So the music is definitely important on these games, and it does sound crisp and clean and clear. It's in stereo, it sounds great through the HDMI cables, and there was no problems that I ever had or heard with using audio on this new HDMI cable. Here's the fifth and final game, Konami game. It is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The Hyperstone Heist. One of my personal favorites, and one of the first games that I ever got for the SEGA Genesis. Now this is a Ninja Turtles game, so it has nice, vibrant cartoon or comic book style graphics and coloring. So you get that nice Ninja Turtles logo, which is very recognizable to me, and might be to you. So you can recognize that the color is a little off on the HDMI cable. You can tell that it's a little more washed out once again. As with all these games, and throughout the entire cable, the HDMI is definitely washed out and less saturated once again, but at the same time sharper and cleaner. And then on the composite cable, you've got a more colorful picture, a little bit brighter overall, but it's fuzzier and it's blurrier. And that doesn't really look that good in this modern era. If you're using an old school TV, such as a CRT TV, it might look a little bit better using the composite cables, but from the same capture device that I'm using here, which is an HD capture device, the composite and the HDMI are significantly different. Now I'm going to talk to you about the ways that you can fix this problem of the less saturation and the brightness issues, which are the two things that we're going to be dealing with mostly here, is brightness and saturation. So if you look for those on your HD TV, a brightness setting or a saturation or color setting, those are the two settings that you're going to be looking out for on your TV. And when you find those, you just want to increase them on both. I would personally start with saturation first, and then if it's still too dark, then add some brightness to the picture. Other settings on your HD TV that might help with brightness include gamma settings, but those are a little more complicated, so if you have brightness, I suggest working with brightness settings first. And I'll show you a before and after image for each of these games showing that I increased the saturation and the brightness, and it does make a difference. It makes it look more like the originally intended version of SEGA Genesis games. And one more thing that we're going to look at on the HDMI cables only is to zoom in on them. Yes, we're going to zoom in on these pixels and look at these games up close, look at some of the characters and the outlines of the characters specifically, and see what some of this detail looks like up close. Because this is an HD resolution, I can zoom it in, and you can see what it really looks like. Alright, how did you like that comparison video? It was kind of surprising to me how the colors look washed out on this new cable, but keep in mind that you can, with most HD TVs and monitors, you can adjust the color settings. So if you just add the saturation up a little bit higher, usually it'll look about the same as what you're used to. Let's check out what's included in the box. What's in the box? We've got three cables included, and one of them is pictured on the front. The other two I'll tell you about in a moment. The main cable is the HD TV cable. It's really simple. There's no modding or anything required to do. Just plug it into the back of your SEGA Genesis Model 2 or 3, and it will plug into the AV video port, and then it'll go all the way through this box looking thing. The box has a selector on it for 16:9 or 4:3 ratio. If you're like me and you like the old school style of TVs and you don't want your picture distorted or stretched, you're going to keep it on 4:3 at all times. You can select it to 16:9 at any time to switch it between 4:3 and 16:9, which is widescreen and standard, at any time during your gameplay, so you can compare it to see which one looks better for the game you're playing. But anyways, it goes out of that box all the way to an HDMI cable. Now you can't use your own HDMI cables. This is all built in, one big cable. You can't take it apart. And the next cable is a micro USB cable that is once again included in the box. and it plugs into this box here in a sort of odd fashion. It comes out at the top, so you have cables coming out at almost all directions. A little weird, but that plugs into a USB port. Now, if you're going to use this cable on a computer monitor or a capture device for recording video games, you can plug it into your computer's USB port and it'll work perfectly fine. There's no connection between that and your computer through the USB, it's just powering it. So it's a USB power source for this box. And the third cable included in the box is actually a really cool one for SEGA Genesis Model 1 users. There was 3 versions of the SEGA Genesis. There was Model 1, which looks like this, and then there's a Model 2, which looks a little bit different, and then there's Model 3, which I don't have, but that one's a little bit smaller. So for Model 2 and 3, you can just plug it in with the cable that comes with it, but for Model 1 you need an adapter, and that adapter is included in the box. It's a really short cord, just kind of adapts the cable to a different cable type. So here's some technical information about how I recorded this video. I used the ROXIO GameCap HD Pro capture device. It's a USB capture device that accepts HDMI and component video. So for the Hyperkin cable that we're looking at today, I plugged it in directly to the HDMI port and recorded it. And I used the settings of 10,000 bitrate, I used 4:3 aspect ratio, which is on the actual cable itself, and I did 60 frames per second recording, and I recorded it at the setting of 720p, which is the maximum for that cable, so that's the best it's going to look on that cable. Now you may be wondering how I recorded composite cables through a component-only device. This capture device has component cables right here. I plugged in my composite cables through a pass-through, a VCR. Yes, I'm using a VCR for my SEGA Genesis to plug into, and then out of that comes the component cables. They go into here, these 5 cords here, and that's how I'm recording with this. So I'm using the same capture device, so you get the same kind of image quality from the capture device, and I recorded it at the same settings as the Hyperkin HDMI cable. Alright everybody, that's it for my review of the HDTV cable for SEGA Genesis by Hyperkin. It's actually a pretty nice cable. It roughly retails for about $30. That's how much I got it for. I was not given this for free to review, and I did not get paid to do this review because I just did it as a fun review because I thought this cable was really nice and I wanted to share my thoughts and details of the cable with you guys. So that's my review of this cable for the SEGA Genesis. If you like this video, please be sure to leave it a like, leave me a comment, let me know what you think, share it with your friends, and subscribe today to Happy Beard Games for more classic gaming goodness. Alright guys, thanks for watching.